Good afternoon. It is just barely afternoon. My name is Joana Levy, and I'm the director of the Center of Excellence in French and Francophone Studies here at UC Berkeley. And today the center is pleased to welcome Joana Guerrin. Guerrin has been at Berkeley this year on a Fulbright fellowship. She's a researcher in political science at the French National Research Institute for Agriculture, Food, and the Environment. Her research is on water policies and efforts to mitigate the threats posed increasingly by global warming. Among her projects, Guerrin has analyzed flood policies in France and in Europe, drought governance in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and public participation in river restoration projects. Guerrin is particularly interested in so-called nature-based solutions, which, as their name indicates, seek to deploy natural mechanisms, such as the restoration of wetlands or green spaces or river flows to mitigate drought and flood risks. These nature-based solutions stand in contrast to interventionist engineering initiatives, perhaps best symbolized by dams, that disrupt natural water flows. So in her presentation today, Guerrin will discuss the development of nature-based water policies in France and the United States. So please join me in welcoming Joana Guerrin.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Joana, for the very kind invitation. Thank you to the Institute of European Studies and to the Center of Excellence in French and Francophone Studies for having me today for this talk. I would like also to thank the College of Environmental Design who hosted me this year as a Fulbrighter here in Berkeley as a Fulbright visiting scholar from France. And I would like also to thank my colleague Anna with whom I've been working on this research project for the past 2 years. So I'd like to acknowledge that this research has been very much of a collective work. So I would like to acknowledge all of the people who worked with me on this research, and you will get to see them later on the slides. So without further delay, I'd like to show a quick overview of the outline for this talk today. So after introducing the research context and a bit of the puzzle that started this research, I will briefly share the methods we have been using in this research before sharing some results about how has the concept of nature-based solutions been actively promoted at the global level? How does it unfold at national level in France and in the US? And how does it mean those nature-based solutions? What do they mean at local level? Before sharing some takeaways and open the floor for discussion. So this talk and this research are grounded within the analysis of flood policy that I have been doing since my PhD in France mainly and in Europe, as Joana mentioned, where we have been witnessing what we call a policy paradigm shift in how states like France are dealing with floods that I called in my research the environmental turn of flood policy. And that we have seen unfolding in the states such as France, but other states as well, in the US too, but not in the same pathways in many countries. So many states such as France have changed their public policies regarding flood issues between the 19th century and the mid-20th century, from considering floods as problems linked to bad management of rivers and trying to deal with those problems through infrastructure such as dams and levees, with the vision that techniques could prevent floods and states could prevent floods from happening through techniques, and states' responsibility was seen as to protect citizens from floods. But from the mid-20th century in France and in Europe, we saw gradually a shift where floods became to be more and more considered as natural phenomena that were actually useful to nature and to ecosystems, and to the vision where society should instead try to adapt to floods because techniques and states would not be able to protect everyone from floods and from especially big and major floods. So since then, policy instruments have been changing and more promoted, such as floodplain preservation and restoration projects instead of higher and bigger dams and levees. So we have seen some big projects, kind of famous projects here in the Netherlands, but a lot of these kind of projects happen in Europe and in the US that are called floodplain restoration projects, where those projects were aimed at reconnecting rivers with their floodplains in order to reach some ecosystem benefits, but also and most of all, to enhance flood protection for citizens. So these kind of projects are called Room for the River, the one that were implemented in the Netherlands, but we have seen many happening in France and in the US. In my PhD, I have analyzed in particular one of these projects that was to be implemented in France on the Rhone River here, to reconnect a floodplain to a main river, the Rhone. But this project was opposed very much by local elected representatives, and eventually it was abandoned after 10 years of conflict. My PhD was about to highlight the politics of this kind of projects that were behind these projects, and that were used instead to be considered of engineering and technical projects. And my work in my PhD was to acknowledge that there were politics behind, right? So I have actually tried to highlight why these kind of projects could be opposed and not implemented at the end of the day from this example. And I highlighted the results in the previous talk that I gave within the College of Environmental Design in this semester. So I have worked on this kind of project in my PhD, and after that, in 2018, I continued working on other issues that were related to water management, but kind of different. As Joana mentioned, I've been working on drought governance, and while doing this research in Brazil, I was kind of struck to find on the 22nd of March, 2018, I know this date very precisely because it's the International World Water Day every year. The theme that was chosen that year was nature. And the motto of this World Water Day, when the UN Water, which is the coordination unit coordinating all UN water agencies, UN agencies on water, defined this thing. And the motto was, how can we reduce floods, droughts, and water pollution by using the solutions we already find in nature? So that was very interesting to me and very striking. And I was wondering, how did we go from policy discourses in the 19 where men through states could control flood and protect and seek to protect everyone from floods through techniques and levees and dams, to discourses where nature will be the one that can solve our problems. So this is like the big puzzle that actually explains why I've been interested into this concept. So I started to dig into these discourses behind this nature being the solution, and I found that a lot was happening behind the scene, and in particular developed by the IUCN, which at the time I didn't know, which is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which is a big entity. Some call it an NGO, but it's actually not an NGO because government can be members, but it's a big entity that is very much influential into environmental conservation, and who was at the time dealing with developing this concept of nature-based solutions. So I instantly wanted to know more about it and about how this concept emerged, what it actually meant, and what it was meaning for places where those nature-based solutions could be developed and implemented. So we developed a project, and this project comes from this very puzzle. So this project is about what are actually nature-based solutions in theory, meaning in policy discourses, but also in practice, meaning on the ground. What does it mean for people, for stakeholders, for managers to implement and promote this kind of project? So we chose to analyze this concept in two different national settings, France and the US, where institutions for flood policy are very different. The institutional setting is very different, but the same concept was kind of used and promoted in both contexts. And our question was, is there any differences and any similarities in developing and defining this concept between France and the US, so different countries? So our aim is to analyze the similarities and differences in the definition, in the implementation, and in the evaluation of nature-based solutions for flood risk management between France and the US. And in particular, we look at how this concept has been appropriated at the global level, the national and federal levels, and the local levels. And when we look at these projects, we look at the governance of the project, at how they engage with citizens through public participation strategies, and how do they monitor and evaluate the outcomes of the project. So as I said, this is a very collaborative project. So we are a bunch of people, Franco-American colleagues working together, two colleagues from Berkeley, Anna from the Center of Catastrophic Risk Management, and Matt Condell, who's here today. Hi, Matt, from the College of Environmental Design. And this is a multidisciplinary project, but very much grounded into social science methods from sociology, political science, and geography. So we are a team of researchers, but also postdocs and one PhD student who is in particular working on the history of the concepts at the global level. And so I wanted to acknowledge that this presentation builds from these results that have been collectively produced. And in terms of the areas we look at, so we look at public policies at national and federal levels, but also at case studies. And so we have several in the West US, basically in California and Oregon. And I'll tell a little bit more about those projects later on. And we have the same in France, urban and non-urban case studies, where we look at what nature-based solutions means for the stakeholders and the people there. We use mixed methods. So basically, we use qualitative semi-structured interviews that we lead at national and federal levels, at regional and state levels, but also at local levels with city representatives, metropolis, and community representatives too in France and the US. We also do field visits, and we go to the field with stakeholders and we listen to them and ask them questions about what is this project about and what do they mean by nature-based solutions. We do participants observation in meetings where we get to be invited. We also do quantitative surveys for the urban case studies where we are going to assess whether people know the term nature-based solutions and trying to see what it means for them. So we have done these quantitative surveys in France, and we're about to do them in the US. And we also use document analysis, where we analyze the literature that has been produced on nature-based solutions from case studies, but also in the scientific sector. And we have one expert committee once per year where people from civil society and from flood policy sectors follow our results and try to help us and to support us in this research. So let's start by some results at the international agenda. So maybe before starting, I would like to say that this research is still ongoing. So any feedback will be welcome. I would appreciate it. So at the global level, what we have been seeing around nature solutions is that it seems to be an attempt from environmental conservation policy sector to bring in climate stakes within this sector and to enter climate policy. So actually this concept of nature-based solutions initially comes from the World Bank, which is the first report that mentions the term in 2008, where this report was actually produced by the World Bank to identify and analyze and take stock of the projects that were funded by the World Bank, and that could be called what they call nature-based solutions. And in this perspective, this report was aimed at being presented at the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, World Conservation Congress that was to be held in Barcelona in 2008. And that was about bringing climate change into the IUCN program. So discussing how biodiversity, how environmental conservation could be helpful for climate change adaptation and mitigation. So this is when I actually discovered the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, that, as I said, is usually labeled as an NGO, but that has some government members, as well as public entities and other local NGOs and national NGOs. So it's a very big institution that has proven to be very much influential within the environmental conservation sector. And that is, it has been more and more willing to be also important and impactful within the climate change problems. So it has been very much famous for the World Commission, for its work from the World Commission on Protected Areas and the Red List that it has been producing, and that you might be aware of, where they actually identified species that are being disappearing or that have disappeared to this red list, and they have been very much influential in pushing for states to adopt protection policies. And less famous was the work from the Commission on Ecosystem Management, this one. That was the Commission very active on the development of the concept of nature-based solutions. So along the years, this concept has gained more and more importance within the IUCN programs, and reaching one of the 3 pillars of the IUCN program was to develop nature-based solutions. So it gained a lot of importance within this union, and it was adopted, a definition of the concept was adopted within IUCN in 2016 within the resolution that they took in, during their Congress in Hawaii. And since then, they have been very busy developing standards to define what is meant by nature solutions, trying to produce education production to integrate this concept within curriculums at different levels, and being very much influential in promoting this concept. So they define nature solutions as actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems which address societal challenges such as climate change, food and water security, or natural disasters effectively and adaptively, while simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. So in a nutshell, this concept identifies projects that are restoration projects, protection projects, but also might be also other kinds of projects that have a beneficial impact on society and on biodiversity. So it could be a very different kind of projects. Here you can find some projects that are defined as nature solutions that are defined for water policies, but it could be very much broader than that. And they have been also very much influential in producing, as I discussed, the global standards that is actually a kind of checklist that people could check to make sure they are actually doing nature-based solutions or not. So that has been also very important within IUCN, and it has to be said that this nature-based solutions concept is encompassing. It's been qualified as an umbrella concept that is actually encompassing other concepts that are famous, such as green infrastructure, national infrastructure, ecosystem-based adaptation or mitigation, and many concepts that are supposed to be encompassed under the umbrella of nature-based solutions. That has been what the IUCN have been developing through the years. So this concept has been very successful at the international level, successful in terms of being used and being institutionalized in different strategies and declarations. So it was very much pushed by the IUCN within the last World Conservation Congress in Marseille, where we were within a more broader discourse of the question of the biodiversity crisis being associated and inseparable from the climate crisis. So this discourse has been also produced by other institutions such as the IPCC and IPBES, that are institutes that produce knowledge for action and for policymakers on biodiversity and climate change problems that actually are working together to prove and to promote the idea that those biodiversity and climate change are two crises that we have to consider together and not separately. So this discourse has been more and more supportive of nature-based solutions, and we can see that it has been more and more institutionalized in the global arena, such as the United Nations Environment Assembly, where a definition of nature-based solutions was adopted in 2022, and after a lot of discussions and a lot of conflicts, it's finally made it into the UNFCCC COP, so for the climate change COP and the biodiversity COP. So very recently in Sharm el Sheikh for the UNFCCC COP in Egypt, in 2022, and in Montreal and Kunming declaration for the Biodiversity Cup in 2022 also, so very recently. I said eventually because the concept has been contested. It's not, it can sound like a straightforward concept, but it has been more and more contested. Contested by different kind of peoples, NGOs, grassroots movements, and also by some states within this international arena for different reasons, because some of them see the concept as promoting land grabbing for carbon sequestration perspectives, and actually having a hard impact or being able to have an adverse impact on food security in some places of the world. Also, others denounce a utilitarian vision of nature that is under this term because we actually use nature to protect society. And it also has been seen as a strategy from North countries to keep their practices and to find solutions to be able to not reduce their carbon emissions. And it has been this contestation and opposition has been very much integrated into the North-South divide that we can see in some arenas. Some states were also fearing of lacking funds because the fact that nature solutions were present within the two climate and biodiversity COP might mean that at the end of the day, there will be less funds for states to mitigate their climate change impact and at the same time develop their biodiversity protection strategies. And it was also seen as a limit to national sovereignty by some states in terms of how do we use forests. And it was also rather contested and controversial, let's say, within some institutions such as IUCN, because some people were actually not seeing not having a nice view on nature being used for climate mitigation. And this concept has been more and more used by other actors, such as private companies and oil giants that have been more and more using the term to go towards carbon neutrality and to produce what they call carbon neutral driving, thanks to nature-based solutions, of course, through using nature as a compensation for their emission. And this was the kind of views from the concept that has been contested and very much controversial within institutions such as IUCN. And private sector has been organizing, as we saw from other work from the climate on the climate change COPs observations, that more and more organized in working on climate solutions through organizations they created that has been very much supportive of the use of the concept. So now let's go to the national levels in France and the US. It will be more brief. So in France, we see that nature-based solutions have been promoted by environmental conservation sectors, such as the global level from actually the IUCN Comité Français, which is a French branch of the IUCN that has been very much active in France to promote the concept. And the perspective of French IUCN is to mainstream biodiversity in other policy sectors. So the idea is to promote nature-based solutions in order to have biodiversity protection policies being implemented in all of the sectors, all of the policy sectors. So the IUCN French Committee has been very active in promoting the concept through different ways, from producing lessons learned to stakeholders, reports, seminars, having people work together and discuss about the concept. They have been creating national working groups that associates the administration along with private sector, local stakeholders, and trying to work together to promote the concept. So we also have a private entity from a public body that is called La Cour des Comptes, who created a branch that's proposed to the private sector to compensate their emissions voluntarily by funding nature solutions. So it has been actually more and more influential in France as well. It was also pushed from the European sector, from the European level, through a European Commission funding project that's called Artisan, which is coordinating by the French Office for Biodiversity, which is the public body working on biodiversity preservation policies. And the idea was to bring nature as a solution for climate change, which was actually kind of not very easy to convince people from the French Office for Biodiversity that biodiversity was actually useful for society. That was kind of a shift of the mindsets that actually was not very easy to overcome within the public body. So they are funding the demonstration projects and trying to leverage funds and to actually do voluntarily and non-binding instruments trying to promote the concepts such as benchmarking, information, and education programs. So the main message here is that a lot has been done in France trying to promote NBS, but with not a lot of money. In the US, this concept has been more and more supported by another NGO, which is the Nature Conservancy, that was more influential in promoting this concept. But actually, they have been supporting another kind of concept that is called natural climate solutions, that can be seen as nature-based solutions for carbon sequestration, using nature as a carbon sequestration strategy so nature-based solution for mitigation. So this concept was kind of developed in parallel to nature-based solutions, but it has been, to my perspective, less and less used by actors, even in the US, that actually now kind of use better nature-based solutions for adaptation or nature-based solution for mitigation instead of natural climate solutions. Even from TNC sector, people use now nature-based solutions for mitigation. So, which is different another difference between the US and France is that the term has been very much used by the federal agencies. In France, it's more from the biodiversity sector trying to promote the concept in other sectors, but here in the US, it has been used by different federal agencies on very different sectors. For example, NOAA, EPA, US Army Corps, FEMA, use nature-based solutions or different expressions that relate to nature-based solutions but are not nature-based solutions. So what we can see is kind of very different terms used, trying to incorporate nature into their work, but different definitions behind, and sometimes they actually use a word for another, such as NOAA, who publishes a paper where they say nature solutions, green infrastructure, or natural infrastructure. Actually, they acknowledge that people use different terms and definitions can vary, but the idea from the federal perspective is to actually adapt to their audience and to use a term or another kind of synonymously. But there has been a federal effort in mainstreaming nature-based solutions through two recent acts, Inflation Reduction Act and Infrastructure Investment and Job Act, where there is billions of dollars to be allocated to federal agencies in order within very other objectives, but also in order to support nature-based solutions through federal funds. So that was also highlighted by an executive order that was taken in 2022 that asked for the development of a strategy and of a report to develop a roadmap on nature-based solutions in the US. So this report has been published in 2022, and it actually gives a strategy that the US gives to their federal agencies to develop more nature-based solutions, which is very different from the French perspective. And also in the US, we can see that it has been very much developed within the flood policy sector, whereas in France, flood policy sector is not very keen on using this kind of solutions, and we can discuss that. So I had another section on nature-based solutions at local levels. Maybe I can be very, very brief on that. The results that are being still produced shows that at the local level, the term nature-based solutions is not always used by stakeholders. What we can see, for example, is existing projects that have been requalified as nature-based solutions, such as the Yellow Bypass, that used to be called green infrastructure, a multi-benefits floodplain, but it's now called nature-based solutions, without actually changing the type of projects that have been developed within this area. We can see very different type of projects under this term of nature-based solutions, and we can see from stakeholders strategic use of the term that they can use nature-based solutions instead of their other terms they used to use before because of funding, but also because of communication stakes, and they try to adapt to the public, and they find nature-based solutions being helpful to speak to the public. And we can also see that some local managers aren't even aware that the case they work on are the qualified nature-based solutions at national or international levels, which happened in Strasbourg in France, where a project was picked by the IUCN Comité Français and used as an example of nature-based solutions, but the managers there had no idea where this came from. So the term can also create tensions, as this appeared in the Camargue in France. So conflict can rise from actually the use of the term itself. So thank you very much for your attention. We have seen different institutionalizations of the concept, and we can talk about that more if we have some time. But maybe the open question that I would like to propose is that what is the future of those umbrella concepts that are supposed to encompass very different strategies and projects, but that can be very much successful in the way that they are being used by people, because they actually mean different things for them, right? But what's left within this concept that means several things, and is it a semantic success or is it an empty shell? I leave it open for now. Thank you very much.